The morning the moving truck arrived next door, Emily Parker felt something shift before she could name it. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a pause between heartbeats. She stood in her kitchen, coffee untouched, staring through the window as if the scene outside had reached into her chest and gently knocked. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Clean streets, tall maple trees, houses that held years of routines. But the man unloading boxes from the truck was new, and somehow he didn't belong to the usual rhythm. He moved slowly, carefully, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He smiled to himself when a box nearly slipped. That small smile stayed with Emily longer than it should have. Emily was 38 years old and married. 12 years with Mark Parker had taught her what stability looked like. Mark was dependable, kind, thoughtful in practical ways. He never forgot to pay bills or call his mother. Their life was safe and predictable, built on shared responsibility and quiet respect. And yet, standing there with cold coffee and a restless heart, Emily felt awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. She shook her head, annoyed with herself. People moved in all the time. New neighbors didn't mean anything. She turned away from the window and focused on the day ahead. Laundry, emails, dinner plans. Normal things. But normal felt heavier than usual. Later that afternoon, Emily stepped outside to bring in a package. As she bent to pick it up, she heard a voice behind her. "Hi, sorry to bother you." She turned. It was the man from the truck. Up close, he looked tired but calm. His eyes were kind, not curious in an uncomfortable way. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I just moved in next door. I think one of my boxers ended up here by mistake." Emily smiled politely. "I don't think so, but you're welcome to check." He laughed softly. "Worth asking?" That was it. Short exchange, no sparks flying, no long conversation. But as Daniel thanked her and walked back toward his house, Emily noticed her hands were trembling slightly. That evening, Mark came home later than usual. He loosened his tie and kissed her cheek, already talking about work. Emily listened, nodded, responded at the right moments. She had done this 1,000 times. But tonight, her thoughts drifted back to Daniel's calm voice and the way he didn't rush his words. She hated that her mind went there. Mark finished his dinner and checked his phone. Emily watched him, searching for something she couldn't explain. She loved him. She knew she did, but love felt quieter now. Like background music that had been playing for so long she'd barely noticed it anymore. Over the next few days, Daniel became part of the scenery. He waved in the mornings. Sometimes he worked in his yard. Sometimes he sat on the porch with a book. He didn't try to force conversations. He didn't hover. That somehow made him more noticeable. One afternoon, Emily was walking back from the grocery store when Daniel offered to help carry a bag. "Thanks," she said, surprised by how natural it felt to walk beside him. They talked about small things, the weather, the local coffee shop, how long they'd lived there. Daniel mentioned he had moved from Oregon after a long period of change. He didn't explain further, and Emily didn't ask. She liked that he didn't overshare. At her door, he handed back the bag and smiled. "Nice meeting you, Emily." That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the walk in her mind. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Nothing crossed a line. Not yet. Her chest felt tight, full of thoughts she didn't want. She told herself it was harmless, just a distraction. People noticed other people all the time. Marriage didn't erase attraction. It only asked for responsibility. Still, guilt crept in quietly. Days turned into a week. Emily found herself timing her routines without meaning to. Watering plants when Daniel was usually outside. Taking the trash out in the early evening. Each time, their conversations stayed polite and brief. But something grew in the space between words. An awareness. A shared pause. Daniel listened when she spoke. Really listened. He didn't interrupt or rush to respond. When Emily talked about her work, he asked thoughtful questions. That alone felt new. At home, Mark remained steady. He worked late, he was tired. He loved her in ways that were reliable but distant. Their conversations were practical. Their silence was familiar but heavy. Emily began to notice the quiet more than the noise. One evening, while they stood on their porches at the same time, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like life slows down right before it changes?" he asked almost casually. Emily froze. The question felt too close, too accurate. She looked at him, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes," she said finally. Daniel nodded, as if that was enough. That night, Emily couldn't escape the thought. What did change mean? Did she want it? Did she fear it? She felt caught between who she was and who she might become if she stopped ignoring her feelings. She tried to pull away after that. She kept conversations short. She stayed inside more. She reminded herself of her vows, her life, her values. This wasn't a story she wanted to tell herself. But distance didn't erase her thoughts. It sharpened them. Mark noticed her quietness. "You okay?" he asked one night as they cleaned up after dinner. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly. He looked at her for a moment. "You seem far away lately?" The concern in his voice made her chest ache. She wanted to say everything. She wanted to say nothing. Instead, she said, "I think I've been thinking too much." Mark smiled gently. "You always do." But he didn't push, and that somehow made it worse. Emily began to question herself. Was she ungrateful? Was she creating a problem where none existed? Mark hadn't done anything wrong. Daniel hadn't done anything wrong either. The conflict lived entirely inside her. One afternoon, Emily saw Daniel sitting alone on his porch, staring at the street. He looked thoughtful, not lonely, but reflective. She wondered what he had left behind in Oregon. She wondered if he missed someone. The thought made her uncomfortable, and she turned away. That evening, Mark came home earlier than usual. "I booked us a weekend away," he said. "It's just us. No work." Emily looked at him, surprised. "Why?" He shrugged. "I feel like we've been living next to each other instead of with each other." The words landed softly but deeply. That night, Emily stood at the window again. Daniel's porch light was on. She watched him go inside, the door closing gently. Behind him, she realized then that nothing had truly happened. No betrayal, no confession, no touch. But something important was already at risk. Not her marriage to another man, her honesty with herself. She pressed her hand against the glass and took a deep breath. Whatever she was feeling, she had to face it soon, because pretending it didn't exist was no longer working. And as she turned off the light and walked back to her bedroom, Emily knew one thing with painful clarity. The quiet of her life had already begun to change. The night Emily couldn't sleep, she realized how dangerous thoughts could be when left unchecked. Daniel's words, "Do you ever feel like life slows down before it changes?" kept repeating in her mind like a gentle tap that refused to stop. She loved Mark. She had built a life with him, filled with stability, shared history, and quiet comfort. And yet something inside her had stirred awake, something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity about what life could feel like if it were different. Not in a dramatic sense, not in a way that demanded betrayal, but in a way that demanded awareness. The next morning, Emily tried to move through her routine. Coffee, shower, breakfast. Mark kissed her goodbye, talking about his work schedule and the late meeting he had. Emily smiled, nodded, and said what she needed to say, but her mind wandered. She replayed Daniel's casual question and the way his eyes had met hers. When he said it, it had been so simple, almost invisible, but it had left an imprint. She told herself to ignore it. She was a married woman. Her life was complete in ways that mattered. And yet, that quiet pull, that awareness, wouldn't leave her. It followed her as she went about the house, folded laundry, and ran errands. Even the little things like watering the plants or checking the mailbox felt infused with the questions she couldn't answer. Was she simply lonely, or had she forgotten how to feel alive? Days went by, and Emily tried to create distance. Without appearing cold, short conversations with Daniel, polite nods. No lingering moments. She even avoided walking past his porch when he was outside, though that small measure of avoidance made her heart ache more than it relieved her. She realized that controlling her feelings didn't control their presence. Meanwhile, Mark noticed her distance. He didn't accuse, he didn't make a scene. He simply asked, one quiet evening, "You seem far away." His voice held concern, not suspicion. Emily felt the weight of her own choices pressing down on her chest. She wanted to tell him everything, the confusion, the stirrings, the quiet longing she didn't understand, but she knew she couldn't. Not now, not yet. Instead, she said, "I've just been thinking too much." Mark nodded and smiled softly. "We all do." The next weekend, Mark suggested they take a trip. "Just us," he said. "No phones, no work, no distractions." Emily felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief because the trip was an opportunity to reconnect. Guilt because she carried Daniel in her thoughts. She wondered if she could push the quiet pull away for a few days, if she could remember what love felt like in its most present form. The trip was to a small lakeside town in upstate New York. It was serene, quiet, and untouched by the rhythms of everyday life. Emily and Mark arrived on Friday afternoon and immediately felt a release that comes when work and routine are paused. They unpacked their bags in silence, each absorbing the calm. Emily noticed the way the lake reflected the sky, the way the sun turned the trees into gold. For the first time in months, she felt the edges of her heart soften. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the cabin with the lake before them, Mark reached for her hand. "I've been worried," he said quietly. "I don't want us to drift apart." Emily looked at him, at the lines of concern on his face, at the hands that had held hers through joy and disappointment, and something inside her shifted. She realized that what she had been feeling, the stirrings for Daniel, the curiosity, wasn't about wanting to leave. It was about wanting to feel alive in her own marriage again. She wanted to notice Mark the way she had once noticed him, before routine and comfort had dulled her awareness. "I know," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "I've just been forgetting myself." They spent the weekend talking more than they had in months, opening conversations they had postponed for years. They discussed hopes they hadn't dared to speak aloud, fears they had buried under the weight of daily life, dreams they'd shelved in pursuit of stability. Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: connection. Real connection. Meanwhile, back home, Daniel was part of her peripheral life, but no longer the center. He was still there, polite and friendly, but Emily no longer allowed herself to linger in thoughts of what might be. She began to see him clearly, not as a temptation, not as a rival, but as a person with his own life who deserved kindness and boundaries. When they returned home on Sunday evening, Emily found Daniel on his porch, fixing a loose step. He looked up, smiled, and nodded at her. She returned the smile, recognizing the moment as a boundary, a gentle acknowledgement of respect. It wasn't about what could happen, it was about what shouldn't. Emily realized then that Daniel had been a mirror, showing her what she had been missing, not another man, but the feeling of being seen, of being present. Her life with Mark had never lacked love, but it had lacked attention to the subtle magic that comes from noticing, truly noticing, each other. Daniel had reminded her, unintentionally, that life could be full, even in ordinary moments. From that day forward, Emily made a choice, quiet, deliberate, and intentional. She focused on Mark with renewed awareness, engaging in conversations, small gestures, and shared experiences with intention. She remembered why she had married him, why she had built a life with him, and why their love was worth protecting. Daniel remained a neighbor, a polite presence, someone who represented nothing more than transient curiosity. Emily occasionally waved, exchanged small talk, and then returned to her own life without guilt or shame. She realized that love isn't proven by the absence of temptation. It's proven by what you choose when temptation appears. Emily and Mark continued to rebuild their connection, not with grand gestures, but with daily attentiveness and honesty. They talked more, laughed more, and slowly, the quiet spaces in their marriage filled again. Emily felt alive not because of someone new, but because she had remembered how to see the love she had always held. In the weeks that followed, Emily would sometimes glance at Daniel on his porch and feel nothing but clarity. He was a reminder of her choices, not a threat to them. Her marriage was not perfect, but it was real. And she was present in it, fully, intentionally. The story of the quiet pull, the temptation, the curiosity, and the gentle risk had passed. What remained was love mature, grounded, alive. Emily had learned that sometimes the heart needs to wander in order to return fully to the place it belongs. And when it did, it could see everything more clearly, feel everything more deeply, and cherish the life it had built. That night, as Emily and Mark sat together on their porch, the neighborhood quiet and peaceful around them, she leaned against him. She breathed in the calm and the love that had never really left. She had faced the stirrings, navigated the uncertainty, and returned home not to a person, but to a life worth protecting, a love worth choosing, and a heart fully awake. No dramatic confessions, no betrayal, no scenes of temptation acted upon. Just awareness, choice, and a return to what mattered most. Emily understood that love is not just a feeling, is a commitment strengthened when it is tested, even by the quiet presence of someone new. And in that quiet, she found everything she had been seeking: clarity, peace, and a renewed devotion to the life she had chosen. The neighborhood continued its routine. The maple trees swayed in the breeze, and the house next door remained occupied by a polite, friendly neighbor. Emily watched the sunset with Mark, realizing that sometimes what seems like a storm is only the wind rearranging leaves, making space for the heart to breathe. She loved her husband. She had never stopped. And now she remembered how to show it in every glance, every smile, every moment of quiet presence they shared together. And that, she knew, was more powerful than any fleeting thought or distant attraction could ever be. Her life had changed. But it had changed in the right way, not because of temptation, but because she had chosen to pay attention to the love she already had. And in that choice, Emily found the deepest kind of romance, one grounded in respect, awareness, and an unshakable commitment to the life she had built with the man she loved.